exciting to look to the future of UNO, what it might be like in times to come. Sometimes, though, it's important to stop and take a good look at the past of the university, the people and the happenings that help make the excitement of future history possible. With this in mind, join me for Reflections in Time. Well, it's the summer of 1985, and we're in a lovely home in southwest Omaha, and the home belongs to friends of mine who have been a part of our university family for a long, long time, Therm and Thelma Engle. And I came over to their home along with our crew to talk about the past at the University of Omaha and the University of Nebraska at Omaha, in a series we've come to call Reflections in Time. And today we want to reflect on the life and times and all the interesting episodes of life that Thelma went through back at the University of Omaha and UNO, as I had trouble remembering that when I'm so used to talking to you in terms of the University of Omaha. Thelma, I'm glad you could join me for a visit on this nice summer day in your lovely home.
It's nice to have you here.
Thelma, you and I have known each other and we've been friends for many years, but I don't think I've ever really asked you in private, and now we're a little more public since we're reflecting on your times. Where do you hail from? Are you an Omaha girl? Is this where you started life?
Actually, I feel like I have been here all my life because I've been here since I was 7 years old. But I was born down in Beatrice, Nebraska, and spent my first 2 years of school in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Oh, so you're creeping toward Omaha then?
Yes, I was on my way all the time.
Yeah, so you're a Nebraska girl.
I'm a Nebraskan through and through.
Yeah. And then what caused your family to come up a little farther north to Omaha?
My mother was a widow, and she came to Omaha and was a teacher in the Omaha Public Schools for all of her career.
And so that was the reason you came here to teach? And
yes.
Yeah, well, what were you doing while she was away teaching? You were going to school, of course, for part of the time, I imagine, through high school and so on?
I had two older sisters, and we were brought up to be pretty independent and to take care of ourselves and behave ourselves,
Was that in part because your mom needed to work and she was gone a lot?
Yes, she was gone a lot. And I had lived with my grandparents down in Lincoln, and we had no problems, as I recall, of being on our own for hours of the day. That wasn't a problem.
Well, the years when you grew up, it's kind of fun to reflect on this too. What was Omaha like? It's different today. It's bigger, certainly, and people are younger and certainly older too. What was it like when you first came here as a city? Do you recall some things about it?
Well, I recall that all of this particular area and everything west of 60th Street, practically, were cornfields and wheat fields and plowed ground. And downtown was the center of Omaha.
When you wanted to shop, that's where you went?
Yes, you went downtown. You wanted entertainment, you went downtown. The big thing, really, were the stockyards. This was the hub of Omaha.
I think that's one thing I heard about the city before I ever moved here. Stockyards.
Well, yes. Of course, it wasn't always pleasant to have the stockyards down there, particularly if the wind was from the south.
Amen.
But we all did realize that was what we were famous for. That's really what Omaha was here for.
That and the packing industry surrounding it were big stuff, weren't they?
Yes, that was, and all of the major packing companies were here. And then, of course, the fact that we were pretty much a railroad hub. The Union Pacific, the Burlington. This was Omaha as I remember it.
And in those days, South Omaha was such a bustling place, wasn't it? Because of the packing industry and the train centers and all those things were sort of near down in South Omaha, weren't they?
That's true. But when you came from another part of Omaha, lived in another part of Omaha, you almost felt like you were going to a different city when you went to South Omaha.
Why do you say that, Thelma?
Well, the ethnic groups were in groups in South Omaha. There was the Italian group and the Bohemian group and, well, the German group, you name it.
Yeah.
They had their own little territory. And one area that was known as Little Italy.
Oh, yes,
for instance.
I heard about that.
And so it was a different atmosphere. You just had a different feeling about it.
Now, in those early years, you and your sisters, what did you do? Go to school? Did you start to work? How did your life progress? Mom was off teaching.
Mom was off teaching. We all went to field club school.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where my mother taught, which
Well,
was
then
interesting.
She could keep an eye on you,
She
sort
could
of,
keep
then.
an eye on it. In fact, she was my teacher for a year in the 3rd grade.
How did that work out?
Well, let me tell you, I could hardly wait for the end of that year to come. And wouldn't you know, they promoted her
To
along
4th
with...
grade?
Yes. So, that was an experience.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things was I never knew what to call her. I didn't want to call her Mrs. Brown. I couldn't call her Mother or Mom. But you know, she was an excellent teacher.
Yeah, you found that out finally, huh?
Yes, as I look back on it, she probably was one of the best teachers that I had.
I would sympathize with people like that who are in class with their mom or their dad is the coach, because I was a preacher's son.
Yeah, yes,
and
yes.
You get
yes,
sort of the same frame of reference.
Same thing. Well, then we all graduated from Central High School.
Oh, you all went Central.
And
did you live in that area then around Field Club?
Yes.
Is that where home was?
Yes. We lived down on 32nd Street, right close to Hanscom Park.
Oh, yeah.
And
nice
then
place.
later we lived on 36th Street, right across from the Field Club.
Oh, so you were close to
Yes.
the roots of school, and then on to Central.
And on to Central, and then my 2 older sisters went to Wayne State College.
Left town to go to college.
And became teachers, both of them.
Just like Mother.
Yes, just like Mother. And I was the one that was never, ever going to have anything to do with the field of education.
Why was that?
Well,
Did
everybody
too
else,
much around you?
Everybody else had done that. My aunts were teachers, my mother was a teacher, my sisters were teachers. I went down to the University of Nebraska and enrolled in the College of Business Administration.
Oh, did you? You were really leaving the nest here.
Yes,
in every way.
In every way. But I got talked into getting married before I ever got...
Here comes Thurman on the scene.
Here comes Thurman. Oh, he'd been on the scene.
Where did you meet him?
I met him at church.
Well, that's a very nice place to meet a man.
And I started going with him when I was 15.
Is that right?
And he being 8 years older than I am, there were a lot of people who didn't think that was quite right. But it worked out.
Evidently, because in the summer we record this, how long have you and Thurman now been married?
51 years.
Well, I think then it's probably going to last.
I think it will.
Oh, so you went to college, down to Lincoln, business, but then marriage intervened. Okay, so you're married now, then what happened?
I had 2 children.
Oh, so you're a homemaker for a while.
I'm a homemaker. I'm a full-time homemaker.
Living over in that area near the university at that time?
The first couple of years that we were married, we lived out on Grant Street, out 45th and Grant.
Oh, yeah.
But then we moved, we built a home on 56th and Poppleton.
I know the place.
So my children went to Washington grade school.
Sure.
and Central High School.
And now you're living near the University of Omaha.
Oh, yes.
Really?
Yes, yes, very close.
Now, your children are off to school and you're still a homemaker. When did this start to change?
This was right after World War II in 1946.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who needed a job. She needed a job for her peace of mind, I think. And there was a big ad in the paper for the University of Omaha wanted temporary help. Because this was when the first big group of GIs were coming back to school.
Here comes the GI students.
And so I told this friend of mine that I thought that would be an awfully nice place. She could take a temporary job. She could get a feel of what it was like to work. And then she could go from there. Would be a good experience for her. Well, she really didn't want to go over there and apply. And I said, well, I know this man that you're going to interview because his name was in the paper, Charlie Hoff. I had known him when I was down at Nebraska, and he was working in the business office at Nebraska.
Lincoln?
At Lincoln.
I didn't realize that.
Yes.
That he had?
He worked there, and he worked at Lincoln General Hospital in the office.
As an administrator
and
or in the office?
Well, in the business office. And I had an auntie who was a head nurse there, so I knew him from both places. I knew him from the dorm, and I knew him from the hospital. So I said, I'll go out with you, and I'll introduce you to Charlie. He's a nice man. So I went with her. Well, that was the beginning. That was like the man who came to dinner. Charlie latched on to me and said, Thelma, you just have to help us. We need help desperately. And I said, I'm not looking for a job. And he said, well, if you just do just some little thing for us, even if you just work on the switchboard for a month, 6 weeks.
They were looking for lots of volunteer help.
Oh, yes. Well, no, they paid a little. I think 75 cents an hour or something.
In those days, not too bad.
And so I thought, well, this would be kind of fun. So
living close to campus?
Yes. I could walk over there, you know. I could get my children off to school, and this was just part-time.
Sure.
So at the end of a month, I went in to see Charlie, and I said, the time is about up. And he said, oh, well, you can't leave. We need help with the veterans' accounts. Won't you come into the business office and help us?
Sounded like Charlie was a very persuasive fellow.
Oh, he was a very persuasive fellow. So then they made the hours so that I could arrive after my children came, or after they went to school in the morning. I could be home by the time they were coming home in the afternoon, and who could turn that down? And then it just evolved from there.
Yeah. Well, now the veterans, what sort? Did you do accounting kind of work?
Yes.
Keeping track of their the money they were getting, or that we were getting from them?
Well, the accounts, we had to figure what their eligibility was, what their payments would be, get the records into the government that they were with us, and what their subsistence should be, and all that sort of thing.
So the GI Bill really brought you to the university in good measure, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Very definitely.
Now this is in the time just after World War II, really.
Yes.
And
1946.
And your children are in school, and the phone is ringing as we record, but we'll just let it ring.
Yeah,
is that all right, Thelma? We'll tell them later what happened. So, as you say, you stayed.
Yes.
What caused you to stay? I mean, you had other things going. You had family, and you had Therm, and you had all these other things. Why in the world did you stick around?
By this time, I was falling in love.
You were hooked.
I was hooked. The university was such an interesting place. There were so many interesting people. And a job opened up in the placement office.
Oh, in the placement office. I never knew you worked there.
Oh, yes. I worked in the placement office for 7.5 years.
Is that right? Doing what sorts of work?
Well, I was Jack Woods' administrative assistant.
I remember Jack. Yeah.
I primarily did part-time placement and teacher placement, and Jack took care of the graduating seniors in business and all other fields.
Well, you worked with the teachers to be,
yes,
huh? In the schools,
yes,
then?
Yes.
So you got quite an acquaintance with, I imagine, the schools around Omaha and out farther,
too.
Oh,
yes, and all across Nebraska and Iowa. I felt like I knew every little town in Nebraska and Iowa.
Were those days good for those who wanted to teach? Were there lots of jobs then, or what was it like?
They were, well, we went through, as they do now, good years and bad years. But by and large, teaching was a pretty good profession.
One of the interesting things to talk about the past is what people were paid. As you mentioned, that 75 cents an hour, which in 1985 seems like piddle, you know. What kind of money were the teachers that you were sending out making? Like in a small town over in Iowa or wherever?
$1,500 a year.
A little over $100 a month?
Yes.
Was that considered a pretty good wage?
That wasn't too bad. Sometimes they had living quarters, sometimes they didn't. If they didn't, why, they probably were getting more than that. But it didn't take long for those salaries to go up.
When did they start really going up? Do you recall? Did it sort of happen in a hurry, or did it come gradually? You're talking about now really right shortly after World War II, the salary $1,200, $1,500 for 9 months teaching. Well, this is for the person with a degree, right?
Yes.
Already certified, all that sort of thing. Then did it happen, the change come soon, or was it into the 50s somewhere?
No, it came fairly soon. In the 50s, salaries started going up, and things looked brighter for all kinds of professions as far as that was concerned.
But you know, about that time period, Thelma, do you remember, you know, $1,200, 75 cents an hour, as you were saying? Did you necessarily feel very poor in those days?
No.
Why not?
We didn't feel poor because practically everybody that we knew was making about the same amount. We had as much as anybody else had. You could go to the grocery store with $5 and get a couple of sacks of groceries. So,
wow. Now we're talking about this period in 1950-ish or so, and you're working in the placement office. And I imagine from what you described, that's a pretty interesting place. You talked to a lot of people around the area and also to a lot of students, I imagine.
And a lot of business people in Omaha because of the part-time placement that we did all the time.
Did we do a lot of part-time placement?
We did a lot of part-time placement.
So the business community was aware of us and using us?
Oh, yes. Very aware of us and using us a great deal.
What were some of the kinds of jobs that our young people were working at part-time? Because historically our students do work while they go to school.
I think that was not too much different really than it is now. We had people in offices, we had people in restaurants, we had people in department stores, we had short-time jobs, we had one of the interesting jobs that I used to have to fill. We had lots of calls for university students to be night man in mortuaries.
Is that right?
And I don't know whether they are still
house sitters or mortuary sitters.
Yes, and that was considered a very good job because these young men got their room and not a lot of activity, but a quiet place to study.
I was going to say a quiet place to study.
Quiet place to study.
So those were popular jobs. And yeah, from what you describe, I think we still see a lot of our students saying things. That's part of the fun of being with the university. You go to a place and a student will pipe up and say, I was in your class last year. I know you worked at the student center. So it makes it a little more home-like. Well, now you're still in placement, but you're attached to the business community, the teaching community. You worked in the placement office for about 7 years, as you said a moment ago. When did that part of your life there at the university end?
That ended when Dr. Bale's office was right across the hall from the placement office. And I was very handy when he needed another pair of hands in his office. And this happened over and over again. He would explode in the door.
He didn't just
office.
enter.
No, he always exploded into the office and wanted me to do this or that, help with this or that. And then he was going to have a big party. And he wanted to know if I would be willing to help with that party. And well, of course I'd be willing to help. I would have done anything he asked me to do. And I think there the seed was planted in his mind that he wanted someone who would be in charge of all kinds of social activities on the campus.
Did you come to the university about the same time he did?
Well, I was there before.
I wondered if that were the case.
Yes, I was there. Didn't he come in 1949?
8 or 9, I believe.
Yes,
yeah.
And I came in 46.
Oh, yeah.
So I was there first with Roland Haynes.
Quite a change of personalities, wasn't it?
Yes, but Mr. Haynes was a dear, dear man.
I remember him.
Yes. I thought a great deal of him. But yes, a very different personality. He was a very, very quiet, very reserved man. Dr. Bale was more an explosive
Now,
man.
as you describe him explosively in a very nice way, you said also that you'd do anything he asked, which
That's
meant
right.
you had a loyalty for him and a liking for him.
And a great respect.
Yeah. But, as you say, and I never did figure out how he ended up having a university hostess. This was the seed, as you suggest, that helped begin it, huh?
Yes.
We're going to have parties and lunches and teas and nobody to sort of run the ship.
He thought that he needed someone that he could call in and say, I want to have a luncheon for X number of people. I'll provide the invitation list. So then invitations had to be issued. All of the arrangements had to be made through the food service, through the building department for setups. Any decorations that we wanted to do had to be done. And I can see where it probably was a help to him to have one person that was doing that.
So, as you started to do this sort of, as he came across the hall and asked you to help, this sort of grew. How long did this go on, this sort of part-time, I'm the hostess kind of thing, before you really moved into that slot?
Actually, it probably was a year and a half or something like that. And I went off on vacation one summer and came back to be told that different arrangements were going to be made. Of course, everybody thought then that all that I was doing was planning parties, while actually they turned over the responsibility to me to schedule everything on campus other than regularly scheduled classes.
Oh, so all social and related meetings.
All meetings, everything that was happening on campus had to clear through one office, which was mine.
And now had you become a separate office?
Yes.
And given a title of hostess?
Yes.
Ah, so finally you had your slot in the university community that you maintained then for all the rest of your years there, right?
Well, there was for a while when I really was considered part of the business office, as long as Charlie Hoff was around. But when we lost Mr. Hoff, I moved out of the business office practically the next week.
Ah, and became
a part of Dr. Bale's
administrative staff,
yes,
really? Yeah.
Yes.
So while you helped us all that were here in those years, in the 50s and 60s, your main responsibility was to our president and his needs.
He was my immediate superior.
Did you have any sort of a staff, or was it just you to do all this planning and scheduling?
At the beginning, I had some part-time student help, but then I had a secretary, and after a few more years, I had a scheduling secretary plus another secretary, and then little by little, when we were in the student center, it grew into a pretty good staff.
Well, all those things the other people helped you with, you used to do by yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then there were fewer affairs.
Uh-huh. Speaking of affairs, and that's, I think, for all of us that have worked and lived at the university for a long time, or a short time if we happen to be blessed to be there when you were, remember the lovely dinners and meetings and that sort of and that sort of thing. Let's just take any instance, and I mean, there are a lot of details. You suggested that earlier. How do you plan for an event like this? What goes into it? Somebody picks up the phone, like Dr. Bale. He calls, says, Thelma, I got to have dinner next Friday for 30 people. What goes on from then on?
Well, first of all, you find a place to do it that isn't already scheduled for something else. And then you get together immediately with the food service department and talk about it, talk about menu, talk about the amount of help that you're going to need. You get together with the building department and decide what kind of a table arrangement you want. You decide what kind of decorations you want for this party. And, of course, in the meantime, invitations have been sent out and replies have to come in. That all has to be taken care of. And it's exactly the way you would do it if you were doing it at home, except at home, you're the person that's doing it all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But what you described there, Thelma, suggests that there was just a lot of detail.
There was a lot of detail and a lot of marvelous cooperation. Without very good cooperation from the service departments of the university, this sort of thing could never have come off as well as so many of the things did.
Yeah. And I remember there were just standout historic dinners and stuff with unbelievable menus and decorations. We think we were at a Swank Hotel in the middle of New York City. And well, all these things came out of the planning of your work and all these various support groups, right?
Well, yes, and as I say, without the marvelous cooperation of the people in the food service department, Ernestine Kerr.
Ah, bless her.
The university couldn't have survived through those times without people like Ernestine.
I'm glad you brought her up. She made life pleasant for all of us.
Yes, she did.
She was
really
your right-hand person, wasn't she?
Yes. No, Ernestine was, well, she was just great.
Now, in a school year, September through May, and I know you worked on the calendar committee, among other things, as time went along, there were certain functions that you had to, as time went along, you had to plan for. What were some of the big things that just occurred about every year that you were responsible to plan and get ready?
Well, all of the time that Dr. Bale was there, and most of the time under the other presidents that I served, we always had a big party in the fall for the incoming faculty, for the old faculty members and the new. We had special things planned for the new faculty. We had homecoming, and of course...
But before you leave that first thing, that fall get-together was not just tea and crumpets. That was a big dinner usually, wasn't it?
Yes, that was a big affair.
I mean, it was a memorable dinner.
We had fun planning.
Sit down for hundreds of people.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you started to mention homecoming.
Well, and then there was homecoming, and of course, all of the student affairs that were taking place.
Yeah, we forgot about those. They were involved here, too.
Oh, yes. All of the student dances, the teas, the parties. And in the earlier days, all of the groups on campus, the organizations, had to have permission for off-campus activities, too. And that all came through my office, and there I was working in cooperation with the Dean of Students office.
How did you decide it was okay for them to have a function off campus? What did you use to decide that?
This usually was a decision that was made in the Dean of Students office. It had to be at a location that we were familiar with, had some idea of what their surroundings would be, and whether or not it was a safe place. We did a lot of protecting of students then that you wouldn't dare try to do now.
Yeah, the atmosphere and the cultural mores were different, weren't they? Yeah, the thing you mentioned that I'd sort of forgotten too is all those dances we had. First, mainly off campus because we didn't have room, and then on campus in the ballroom. We had lots of those, didn't we?
Oh yes, and in the beginning, we had those dances in the auditorium in the old administration building because there were not permanent seats, and we could clear.
Fold up the chairs.
Yes, fold up the chairs, not have it be a classroom, and we would have to turn it into a dance hall or a dining room.
Now,
or whatever.
Were there class dances? Were these sorority and fraternity functions? What were these social get-togethers usually, and there were many of them?
They were most any of the student organizations, but primarily the Greek organizations that had the big dances. But then there were the regular school dances, too, that were always held.
One thing you didn't mention, and probably we're going to get to it, was at the other end of the school year was graduation time.
Oh yes, commencement, and always the big reception following commencement, and usually a big luncheon for the platform dignitaries. But back in the early days of Dr. Bale's reign, we had a party for all the graduating seniors. And I can remember one year when we did a luncheon, and we put tables, you know, the double sidewalk that came up from Dodge Street to the front of the administration building with the trees on either side. We put the lunch tables down the sidewalks.
Is that right?
And had an outdoor picnic. Not really picnic because it was a nice served luncheon.
It was a sit-down luncheon.
Sit-down luncheon for all of the graduating seniors.
Over the years, now this is an unfair question, there must be thousands of people that came out there and sat down to a wonderful meal and a served luncheon or dinner. Where in the world did we get all the help to do this? You didn't have it in your office. We didn't have enough people working in the food service. How did we get all this done?
We got this done primarily, the serving, through the Dundee Presbyterian Church.
Why that particular church?
Because Charlie Hoff was a member of the Congenial Couples class.
I remember the Congenial Couples.
And he inveigled them to come to the university and help serve a dinner. And that was the beginning.
Well, what was in it for them or the church?
They were paid by the person, and that money went into their class treasury, and then
their club treasury,
or club, and well, I was thinking their Sunday school class.
Oh, I see. You were right the first time. Sorry.
But then they always had dinner, which was kind of a social affair for them too. After we got through with the other. The main group, we always had a dining room set up someplace where they had their dinner. Oh,
so they had a good meal out of this too?
Yes.
Well, that was a happy arrangement. This went on indefinitely, did it?
It's still going on.
Is that right? Through all these years?
Through all these years.
And this started when? Way back in the 50s?
Oh, yes.
Well, that's been an enduring part-time quality of our university. That's been a wonderful service to us. And
it has been
hopefully to the church.
A wonderful thing for the university. Those people were so faithful and so good, and it was always kind of be serving me dinner because all of these professional people, you know, that belonged to that class, didn't make any difference to them. They came and carried those trays, and it was fun.
Yeah. You know, Thelma, for many of us at the university who have been there and who still are, Some of our most pleasant memories are certainly student-related. But going beyond that, I think, for many of us in the 50s and 60s, the social activity that we had, which was beautiful and which we felt as a group, I think generally was engineered, and it was, by you. We just had so many nice things to go to. Teas and lunches and dinners. Not that they were every day, but they were spaced out during the year, and there was so many pleasant things to go to. Well, why do you think, if this is a fair question, that we did all that? Was it because of the times? Was it because of the leadership at that time? What do you feel contributed to that?
I think it probably was a combination of things. During Dr. Bale's time, he wanted us all to feel like we were all a part of a very important venture. Mm-hmm. And we had equal billing. It didn't make any difference whether you were working in the food service, the building departments, the ground crew, or you were a secretary or a full professor. You had a job to do. Everybody had the same goal. We were supposed to be educating young people, bringing them in, sending them out better than when they came in. We were supposed to be exposing them to all kinds of different experiences. One of the experiences he thought was very important was graciousness, gracious living, social graces, being able to take your place in the business world, the teaching profession, anywhere that you would end up, you would know how to act as ladies and gentlemen.
Very interesting observation. That was key then, wasn't it? That
was one of the things that he stressed. You not only had to have an education book-wise, you had to have an education in human endeavors, human behavior.
We used to hear the term finishing school for young ladies and so on. Well, this was sort of in that mode then, wasn't it, in his thinking?
Well, to him it was extremely important.
Yeah. And you evidently agreed with him.
I agreed with him wholeheartedly.
Yeah. And I think generally we all did. Yeah. So it made your role there vitally important, and this permeated the functions, little or big, didn't it?
Well, we tried to. Yeah. We did our best.
Did you have a lot of money, a lot of budget to work with?
We didn't have any money to work with.
I thought that's what you'd probably say.
Well, yes, but you know, we had lots of good friends. For instance, when we were called upon to do the Exarban reception, when Dr. Bale was
King of Exarban,
we had 1 week to do this tremendous affair. And we did it in the auditorium in the administration building. We called together faculty people, Board of Regents people, community people. Those people were just wonderful. These ladies came laden with their beautiful sterling silver, their coffee services, their silver punch bowls, everything that it would take to make a beautiful setting for this party.
What was the motif? How do you describe that? That was a great night.
We tried to turn the auditorium into a garden with a garden down the middle of the room and lots of flowers and greenery all around. And one of the things that stands out in my memory about preparing for that, it was getting very late the night before this affair. It was midnight, and Dr. Clark was sitting polishing brass urns that we were going to put flowers in. And we were looking at this garden arrangement, and everybody agreed it needed a focal point. It needed something else. And someone said, I know, there's a beautiful sundial in a garden up here on Happy Hollow. Maybe we could borrow it. At midnight, those crazy people went out, got in the car, rang the doorbell of this house, asked them if they could please borrow their sundial, told them what it was for, and they said, yes, of course, take it.
For heaven's sake.
They brought it back, and we put... But it was that kind of... That was the kind of thing that we got by with, that we could build beautiful settings, because people would loan us things. People gave us things. They gave us lovely things to use to contain flowers. They gave us flowers.
And so really most of the help to prepare for this wonderful event when he became king of Xarban was just people who agreed to help.
That agreed to help, who loved him and wanted this thing to be something that he and the whole university could be proud of.
Well, his idea on strength of purpose and graciousness was paying off in a very personal way, wasn't
Very.
it? Because it came back to haunt him very well here when he became the king. That was a memorable party. That was one party you tell about. And then you told about that lovely luncheon for all the seniors on the double sidewalk a little while ago. I imagine there are no end to them, but why don't you talk about some of the ones you remember, the really unusual ones that went well or went poorly, but the dinners and the luncheons, the teas.
One of the big affairs that we did for the College Business Managers Workshop.
Oh, I remember that so well.
We did a barbecue out in what was then called the Women's Athletic Field. We built a wheel, and the spokes of the wheel were the tables. We decorated the whole thing with a horse and buggy, a covered wagon, all that type of thing, and lots of flowers. And we had big barbecue racks that we did T-bone steaks, and we had marvelous entertainment. We had a group called the Kids Next Door. And nobody now probably would even remember them, but they were wonderful.
Oh, I've heard of them.
And
I saw them.
I think we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 400, 450 that we grilled steaks for.
450 steaks? Well, now, were we equipped in terms of regular staff to handle this, or were this some more part-time people that helped?
Students helped, staff members helped, anybody that we could recruit. And they all came and they did it willingly and had fun doing it.
You know, I think our students in those days worked part-time other places as much as now, but yet they found time to do some of these things.
Yes.
And like to. Do you think the size of the university and the closeness of people, what was the reason for all of this?
Well, the university wasn't so big.
Right.
We knew hundreds of students by name. You could walk down the hall and say hi, you know, to half the ones and know what their names
And nearly everybody spent most of their time in that lovely administration building, didn't they?
Well, either that or in that lovely old white building behind that we called the Shack.
Yeah. Oh, you remember the Shack.
Oh, yes.
The semi-permanent student center, and eventually used for educational purposes.
Yes.
Yeah, the campus, when you came to it, and in the early years, didn't have many buildings, did it?
When I came, there was the administration building, there was the Shack behind, and there were the two Quonset huts. And this is one thing that Charlie Hoff said to me when he wanted me to see. He said, "Don't you want to be here to see this place grow?" He said, "We're going to build a field house." Pretty soon now.
And they did very soon.
Yes, they built the field house. And then we're going to build a library. We're going to build a real library. Well, they did. And I stuck around to see a lot of buildings.
Yeah, I should
built.
say so. We're talking about functions, and one of them, and we're jumping in time and we can move around, we don't have to follow any chronological order, a mammoth event, and you were still involved at that time, as I recall, was when Dr. Leland Trailwick was going to be inaugurated.
Oh, yes.
Describe that event if you can. It should stand out in memory because of its very size, if nothing else.
I don't think I possibly could describe it within our time limitation here. It was a series of events.
Like what? What all did we have?
We had luncheons, we had breakfasts, we had practically parades, everybody in their academic regalia. We had, well, a luncheon that was just unbelievable in the Student Center. We had the ballroom, we had the old cafeteria, we had the dining rooms across the hall. We had tables and chairs set up practically every place that there was a place to put a table and a chair.
Who were all the people coming to lunch? You mean students, faculty, what?
Well, we had representatives, of course, from all of the student organizations and the classes. We had people from the community. We had school administrators from across the country.
Oh, yes.
We had college presidents from all of the regional colleges. It was a big affair.
Yes, it was. In fact, it went on for more than one day, didn't it?
Oh, yes, it went on for several days.
Yeah. What are some of the other events in memory that stand out to you, Thelma?
I think probably the 50th anniversary with all of its parties was a fun time. We did lots of fun things for these groups that came back to the university every year, like the College Business Managers Workshop, the Presbyterian pastors that came every year. And we tried to do really special things for them.
What were some things that you did that you'd call special? Because you did so many special things.
Well, I don't know that they were special other than we tried to make them really pretty. And we had buffets, and we served flaming desserts and all that.
But also, I think the hallmark of much of your leadership in being the hostess for our university was just, as we came into a room, the beauty of the place. You spent a lot of time in just the simple decorations of table and the arrangement of tables that gave us a motif. Where did you learn how to do that, Thelma?
I don't know. I think maybe they were just... that was one of those things that you learn by doing.
Yeah.
And I was surrounded with a lot of very talented, gracious people. Bea Utley, who was an artist in everything that she did. And she was wonderful about suggesting and helping. I think about people like Lucy Merriam, who was Board of Regents, gracious lady, who with just a little subtle suggestion could open a whole new idea for you. Mrs. A.C.R. Swenson, who was on the Board of
I remember her well.
Regents.
An interesting person.
Yes. Mrs. Lucas, Mrs. W.H. Thompson, gracious ladies.
And these people all helped you.
Oh, yes. All of these people helped.
Why did regents and regents' wives and deans' wives get involved here? My, this is kind of unusual, isn't it?
It wasn't then. We thought that this was just part of it. They thought it was just part of it.
And you'd feel free to call them and ask them?
Surely. Surely. No problem at all.
Wow.
No problem.
And still all these fantastic meals and stuff. There were things that cost, but you didn't have any special budget yourself to work with at all.
After a while I did.
Oh, you did?
Yes. They gave me...
When did that start?
That improved. After I'd been in the Student Center for several years, they decided maybe I needed a working budget. And
so you finally got
so
one.
I finally got one. It never was very large, however. But,
and yet, the functions that you presided over in a hostessing way earlier were just as nice, and you somehow got things together. You did a lot of borrowing, like the sundial, didn't you?
yes, yes, we did a lot of borrowing, and I remember when we decided that we wanted table skirts. We couldn't afford to buy table skirts. I went out and bought bolts of material and borrowed a sewing machine, and the people in food service, when they'd have a spare half hour, would go in, the ones that were capable of running a sewing machine, and they made all of those beautiful skirts that we had for tea tables. And
I imagine some are still in use.
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised.
So all through your working life at the university, the things you're describing here, Thelma, you depended on people not only in the university community and the staff, but outside, and they came and helped.
And they came. Simey from Simon's Flowers, Ed Bradley from Bradley's Flowers. They loaned me things. I don't think they ever made any money on me or on the university, but they did beautiful things for us.
I think all that's a testimony to your leadership and their warmth and liking for you, too. You know, Thelma, another big event in the life of the university was started by Bill Utley, as I recall, an Institute for Public Affairs. Was that the right name for it?
World Affairs.
World Affairs. And that's what it was, World Affairs.
Yes, it was World Affairs.
You met a lot of interesting people there, didn't you?
Oh, I met so many interesting people.
Who were some of them?
Well, let's start out with William Shire.
Yeah.
He was there, and we had a dinner for him ahead of time. And between the main course and dessert, I got this from Dr. Bale. So I went over, and he said, Mr. Shire needs to talk to you.
Huh.
So we went out in the hall, and there he stood. He had the button. He had a jacket on that had one button. He had pulled the button off. And he said, is there any way that we can fix this? So I said, well, yes. I had a needle and thread in my office. So we retired to my office. And we sat there, and we visited while he got his button sewed back on. And I thought, there are people in this world that would give anything for this opportunity. Yeah. Anything. Another one of them was Indira Gandhi.
Oh, my.
Indira, who came into my office and closed the door and said, I have to rearrange a little. And she took this beautiful sari and rearranged it, and here am I, you know, with my eyes big and thinking, again, the world is full of people that would love to have this little experience. James Michener, who came into my office and said, could we close the door and let me put my feet up for 5 minutes and rest? You just go right on with your work. I'll just rest a little while. And again, I thought, this is a remarkable opportunity, but I'm going to let this man do exactly what he said. He wants to rest.
Yeah, we did have lots of interesting people.
Oh, we had lots of interesting people, and I had lots of interesting experiences with them because I had been introduced to them as the social director. If they wanted anything, they were to let me know.
And they did.
And they did.
Now, speaking of people, in our last few moments on our reflections in time here, Thelma, I want to talk about some of the people briefly that came through your life, a few of the many thousand, really. We started with Dr. Bale. You made comment about him. Another comment or so about he and Mrs. Bale.
A remarkable couple. She was a fiery little thing. And I well remember after one of the affairs that we had had, where we'd had a progressive dinner, where we served the first course up on the third floor of the administration building and worked our way down through the courses to dessert. And the next day, Mrs. Bale came over to the university because she had loaned me some things to use, and she sat down across the desk from me and she said, Thelma, I have to talk to you. Milo asks impossible things of people. It's just ridiculous. She said, the next time he asks you to do something like this, you stand in front of him, look him right straight in the eye, stomp your foot, and say, I will not do that, Milo. That is ridiculous. Now, can you imagine me? Can you imagine anybody stomping their foot?
Maybe Mrs. Bale, but no one else.
But I'm sure that that's exactly the way she operated. And he loved it.
Yeah.
He loved it from her. She was a delightful lady with a mind of her own.
Bill and Bea Utley.
Bea and Bill Utley. Two of the most gracious, charming people that I have ever met. Smart, I think I can just sum it up by saying they were the epitome of graciousness, always.
Along that line reminds me of another person, Dean McGregor.
Oh, bless him. There again, you couldn't help but be educated just by being exposed to him, because he taught you something all of the time. You either were talking about literature, you were talking about music, you were talking about world events, and he was a delightful, delightful man.
Dr. Wilfred Payne.
The men of gold. Probably the most egotistical man that I have ever known, and deserved to be egotistical.
Yeah, he was a brilliant fellow.
He felt that he could do anything, and he really could. I loved him. He was a very interesting person.
Margaret Killian.
Oh, Margaret Killian. Nice person. Talented person. Fun person. And her students loved her.
Now, you've spent a lot of years at the university, and now in more recent years you retired. We could go on talking about people for a long time. I think your friends who might watch this tape wonder what a busy person like you, a hostess, does in retirement.
Nothing that I can say that I'm real proud of my accomplishments. I have a family, grandchildren, children. I have a home to take care of. I try to do some entertaining. I have a social life.
You still have a social calendar.
Yes, I still have a social calendar. I wish I could say that I was doing something that was really, really worthwhile for my fellow man. Right now, I don't think I am. But maybe I'll start something.
Well, you've spent your life doing that, Thelma, and I think for those of us at the university who've had the good fortune to know and get to know you and your work and to love you, why, I think it's been a privilege to work with you and to know the excitement of what you described earlier, really, as the graciousness of life at our university that you, through Dr. Bale and others, helped permeate. And for that, we thank you, Thelma. And I want to thank you sincerely for taking time to be with me today as we are in your lovely home reflecting on your reflections in time.
Well, and let me say thank you for making it so easy for me, making it a pleasure.
It's kind of you to say. We're joining you in 1985, the summer, that is, of that wonderful year.